What is up guys, this is RMD Tech and today we're going to be looking at this GTX 570 that I picked up whilst I was on holiday in Wales. Now, I really can't help myself most of the time. I do find myself browsing Gumtree and Facebook Marketplace far too much. Even when I'm on holiday in Wales, I was browsing and did manage to find this GTX 570 for a bargain price of £5 British. And so I couldn't really say no, I had to go pick it up. So we drove 20 odd minutes down the road, found the bloke, gave him a fiver, and in return, I got this GTX 570. Now, I never asked him to test it, and I didn't test it myself either, so hopefully it does work as described. And so what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into a system today and see how it performs. But before we get into that, if you guys haven't already seen, I am currently hosting a giveaway. Link to that will be down in the description along with all the details, but please do be sure to enter. I'm really happy to be running this giveaway, and it is to celebrate 5,000 subscribers. So thank you all very much for subscribing, and I can't wait to see you in the video. Launched in December of 2010, the GTX 570 was released at £280, but last month I bought it for just £5 from a guy on Facebook in Wales. Released with the same GPU as the GTX 580, the GTX 570 utilised a GT110 GPU based on the Fermi 2 architecture, which was used on graphics cards from the GT420 all the way to the GT645. However, due to its age, Fermi 2 has pretty poor driver support, which is worth remembering if you're considering purchasing one of these secondhand. Interestingly, my model has 1.2GB of GDDR5 VRAM, an unusual amount to have. However, there is a version of the GTX 570 which comes with 2.5GB of VRAM. The lack of VRAM on our card, however, could lead to lower 0.1 and 1% lows, as well as some stuttering that we might not see if we had the 2.5GB version. Yet another odd thing about this card is the I/O. The dual DVI connections on the rear are fairly typical, especially of the era. What I wouldn't actually expect though is the mini HDMI ports that are also on the back of this card. For today's testing, we'll be using a Ryzen 1800X 8-core CPU at 3.7 GHz, as well as 32GB of Corsair 3000 MHz RAM. We'll be keeping the GPU at its stock speed of 770 MHz just to make sure that there isn't any discrepancy between the speeds that I can achieve and the speeds that you can achieve at home. So that'll be our test system for today, and so without further ado, let's get into the benchmarks. Starting off the list with a game I only recently bought, Rocket League, where we actually saw really good frame rates. Whilst on 1080p medium settings, we saw an average FPS of 61.9, with 1% lows of 43.8 and 0.1% lows of 28.9. The experience here was really smooth and very enjoyable, so whilst Rocket League isn't exactly a demanding game, it's nice to see that this card can still play popular games in 2019. Wreckfest is a game that features in my test suite quite regularly, and playing at 1080p medium settings was quite disappointing, only giving us an average FPS of 18.5 and dropping to 11.9 frames per second in the 1% and 0.1% lows. Since I couldn't really class this as playable, I decided to test dropping the settings down to a low preset, which gave us a massive boost in frames per second. Dropping down to low, we saw our average FPS rise to 66.5 and our 1% lows skyrocket to 51.5 frames per second, leaving the 0.1% lows not far behind at 39.8 FPS. Minecraft is a particularly CPU intensive game, and so I was expecting decent frame rates anyway. In Minecraft, with fancy textures and smooth lighting at 1080p, we saw an average frames per second of 300, and 1% lows only dropping down to 39.9. However, our 0.1% lows dropped all the way down to 19, giving us a mostly smooth but very slightly choppy experience. To stretch this system, I decided to make Minecraft more GPU intensive by installing the Shaders mod. Using Chocopic 13's V7 high shaders, we saw our average FPS tank to just 15.6 and our 1% and 0.1% lows dropped to about 10 FPS too. Clearly this GPU struggled here. PUBG is yet another popular game of 2019. However, partly due to poor optimization, PUBG had to run at the low preset to get anything close to a playable FPS. With the low graphics preset enabled, PUBG ran at an average FPS of 29.3, with 1% lows of 10.5 and 0.1% lows dropping to a terrible 2.3 FPS. So unfortunately, I can't recommend this GPU for PUBG, as the second you see any action, you'll likely face a big increase in stuttering, which makes winning the fight quite challenging. The last game on our list today is War Thunder. This is a game I haven't played in a very long time, but since I had it installed, I thought, why not? Using the high graphics preset at 1080p, we achieved an average FPS of 44.6, which is reasonably respectable. However, our game was quite choppy, with 1% lows dropping to 15.7 frames per second and 0.1% lows going to a catastrophic 1.6 frames per second. So as you guys can see from those benchmarks, the GPU is actually fairly competent in modern games, being able to play at 1080p between 30 and 60 FPS in the majority of titles. Sometimes, yeah, we had to crank it down to low settings, but majority of the time we were able to keep it at medium. Now, does that mean I'd recommend this GPU? Well, if you're able to get it at the same sort of bargain price that I did, then yeah, I'd probably say this GPU is worth picking up, especially if you're only going to be putting it in like a secondary system that isn't going to be used primarily for gaming. However, if you are going to be getting this GPU at the more typical sales value of £20 to £30, then I probably wouldn't recommend picking it up, because at that price point it really isn't worth the investment, and I'd probably recommend spending that £20 to £30 on getting a slightly better CPU and picking up an APU instead, and then potentially getting a better dedicated GPU further down the line when you've saved up a little bit more money. Because at £20 to £30, I really don't see this as a good investment. But I would like to thank you guys for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed the video and perhaps found it useful. If you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below, and I will see you guys in the next video.